Good afternoon and welcome to the September 22nd, 2020 special meeting of the Glendale City Council. Due to evolving situation with COVID-19 and health recommendations from LA County Health Department, the Glendale City Council meeting will be available to the public electronically. Due to social distancing requirements, the public will not be able to attend the meeting. This meeting can be viewed on local cable Spectrum and Charter Cable Channel 6 and AT&T Uverse Channel 99. You may also stream online through our website, www.glendaleca.gov, by scrolling all the way to the bottom of the web page and selecting live streaming, which is third icon from the left. For public comments and questions during the meeting, call 818-937-8100, which is on your screen. Please do not call in advance of the agenda item. With this being said, may I have roll call, please?
Councilmember Brotman.
Here.
Devine.
Here.
Kasakian.
Here.
Najarian.
Here.
Mayor Agajanian.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Ajemian. Next item, please.
Next item would be the agenda for the Tuesday, September 22nd, 2020 special public meeting of the City Council. It was posted on Tuesday, September 15, 2020 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
What's next?
Next would be one community development regarding requiring commercial development in Glendale to provide rooftop solar photovoltaic systems. A motion providing direction to staff.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert. Who's presenting this? Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
City Manager Yasmin Beers.
No
I mean,
problem.
the last day on job, and I was.
You've already
forgetting.
forgotten about me. That's okay.
Sorry, very sorry.
Mayor
we
Agajanian.
never will
members-
forget you.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
for
you, sir.
sure.
Thank you. Mayor Agajanian, members of the City Council, good afternoon. We are here to provide a report on commercial rooftop solar systems. And to provide you with a report is Ms. Cassandra Pruitt from Community Development, and she's one of our planners. Cassandra.
Yes, Ms. Pruitt.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council members. Today, I'll share staff's findings regarding the implications of requiring commercial development projects in Glendale to provide rooftop solar panels, also known as solar photovoltaic systems, or PV for short. This is an image of a commercial PV system for our reference. To give some background on this item, at Council's June 9th meeting, Council requested staff look into this issue because the building code currently only requires commercial development to provide 15% of roof area as solar ready, meaning the roof area is reserved for and can structurally support the PV system. But current code does not actually require any installation of PV. A summary of the findings are as follows. First, adopting a commercial PV installation requirement requires obtaining California Energy Commission approval to adopt local building standards beyond what is currently required by the California Energy Code. Such a local standard will be called a REACH code. In order for a REACH code to be approved, the local agency is required to provide to the CEC analysis and findings that demonstrate the code will result in energy savings and be cost effective. At least 16 cities within California have successfully adopted a REACH code that requires commercial projects to provide PV. The 16 cities are mostly in Northern California, but they include Santa Monica and West Hollywood. For these cities' required energy savings and cost effectiveness studies, almost all of them relied on a 2019 statewide study that was prepared by the Southern California Edison. San Francisco and Carlsbad prepared their own studies. The Glendale City Council had posed a few specific research questions to staff relating to commercial PV, and these questions were not able to be conclusively answered within the 3 cost-effectiveness studies that other cities used, nor with online research. So staff recommends that Glendale conduct its own study in order to answer those questions. I'll now go into further detail about what I just summarized. The current statewide building code standards, which were adopted by the City of Glendale, include what's known as Title 24, which are building energy efficiency standards. Current standards require commercial buildings to provide 15% of the roof area as a solar zone, which can be used for future installation of PV. As I mentioned, the standards do not require actual installation. A local jurisdiction can adopt local energy efficiency standards that exceed those standards, and it's called a REACH code. REACH codes must meet 4 criteria for approval.
Excuse me,
I'm sorry?
what it means that 15% of roof area reserved as solar zone, but then we don't want any installation? We just reserve the area? Why we do that?
The current building code requires that a certain percentage of the roof area be reserved for future installation. My understanding is that there is somewhere in the pipeline, eventually, the building code will be requiring installation of PV, but it's not at this time.
That's what we adopted that?
No, this is the state building code, and the city adopted the state building code.
Ah, okay. Doesn't make sense, but all right, it's okay. Please continue.
Thank you. So in order for a REACH code to be approved, it has to meet 4 criteria, including being based on local conditions, being cost-effective, being not less restrictive than state requirements, and not preempting federal appliance energy efficiency standards. The REACH codes also require Energy Commission approval. Just waiting for the slide to advance. There we go. The REACH code approval process involves providing an analysis and cost-effectiveness study proving that the REACH code meets the 4 criteria, then submitting an application to the California Energy Commission Executive Director with any required environmental review documents. The process includes a 60-day public comment period and final review and approval by the California Energy Commission. At least 16 cities have successfully adopted REACH codes that require commercial development projects to provide PV. These requirements apply to new construction and additions for some cities. Many cities took advantage of the current Title 24 solar zone requirement by requiring commercial projects to install PV within the already required solar zone of 15% of roof area. Others require a 3 kilowatt system if the building is under 10,000 square feet in size, or a 5 kilowatt system if the building is over 10,000 square feet in size. These sizes cannot be easily translated into percentage of roof area, though, as will be further described later in the presentation. The City of Sebastopol's REACH code is a good example of how to incorporate flexibility within the code. Their code includes a list of options, for example, including incentives for exceeding requirements, allowing credit for using other forms of renewable energy, having alternatives or allowing alternatives for dealing with practical implementation issues, an option for meeting requirements across multiple buildings, and several other provisions. Their code is a good example of how Glendale could tailor its own REACH code to address local concerns. One specific issue that Council asked staff to look into is how PV effectiveness relates to building size. Specifically, whether a PV system on a small building would actually result in significant energy savings and thus be cost-effective. Unfortunately, sufficient research on this issue is lacking. Only 2 studies were identified that specifically analyzed small buildings, one from the city of San Francisco and one from the city of Carlsbad. Both showed that PV systems for small buildings are cost-effective over a 25 and 15-year period, respectively. However, Carlsbad studies reported on whether the systems were cost-effective, not on what percentage of energy offset they achieved. San Francisco's study did provide such a breakdown, which is included on this slide. As you can see in the floor area column on the left, the building sizes range from 2,500 to 500,000 square feet, with most using a system covering 15% of roof area. The listed building types are sorted in order of building size, with the smallest at the top and largest at the bottom. If there were a direct correlation between building size and energy offset, the numbers in the energy offset column on the right would also increase from top to bottom, which you can see is not the case. In fact, the building uses and the ratio of the roof area to overall building size appear to be significant factors in how effective the PV systems are. And common sense tells us that for the same use, a large building with a small roof would be less efficient than a small building with a large roof, since the ratio of roof and PV system to floor area would be less. As a note, most new commercial buildings in Glendale would not be considered a small building, according to any of these cost-effectiveness studies. The industry standard small building type used for modeling is 1 story and 5,500 square feet, and most new commercial buildings in Glendale exceed that size. It's also important to note that the findings from this one study should not be used as a blanket generalization for all PV systems. Each of the cost-effectiveness studies are based on complex modeling that includes variables such as mechanical system configuration, fuel mix, roof area, PV system design, financing, local labor and material costs, utility rates, etc. In fact, the Carlsbad study is probably a more accurate study to use for Glendale since it better matches some of the modeling inputs that go into the modeling. Another difference between the studies is that San Francisco included the projected reduction in federal tax credits for PV systems, so it shows PV systems for small buildings becoming less effective over time. So staff advises that Glendale conduct its own study so that more reliable data can be used to provide answers to these research questions. As a note, planning is currently studying LEED and EcoDistrict standards for sustainable neighborhood design, which are closely related to this discussion of potentially adopting a REACH code. And the findings are anticipated to be presented to Council in early 2021. Council may wish to consider waiting to take action on the current agenda item until the LEED and EcoDistricts report is presented in order to avoid redundancy or any potential incompatibility. With that, staff recommends Council consider at least 3 different alternatives in terms of acting on this agenda item. 1, direct staff to explore hiring a consultant to conduct the recommended Glendale-specific study. 2, continue this discussion to a future agenda item relating to energy efficiency buildings and neighborhoods. 3, don't pursue a REACH code at this time. And of course, Council may propose any other alternative. If Council does direct staff to explore hiring a consultant team, that work would include defining the scope of the study, such as what specific questions need to be answered and whether the REACH code should include provisions beyond commercial PV. It would include obtaining a cost estimate from consultants, returning to Council for a request for budget appropriation to fund the study, and determining where this project fits in with current work program priorities. That concludes my presentation of this agenda item. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any callers?
Yes, Mayor, we have one caller.
Okay, let's go to the caller.
Elise Kalfayan. Elise, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you. Hello, my name is Elise Kalfayan, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Glendale Environmental Coalition. Glendale Environmental Coalition is very glad to see the city looking at ways to increase solar installations on buildings in the city, including new commercial and high-rise residential development. We're very supportive of the city's efforts, and we appreciate the work staff has done to put together the report for today's meeting. The Sierra Club and Glendale Environmental Coalition have sent a letter and concept paper for the council and staff consideration, which proposes a requirement for solar on new construction and incentives for installation of larger systems beyond the required amount, as well as for existing buildings. We hope the city will consider these ideas as it continues to move forward with investigation and research and how to best shape the solar policy. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have another caller, or that's it?
No, Mayor, that's it.
Okay, my colleagues, if anybody wants to comment on this item?
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, Mr. Brott.
if I could start off just with a couple questions, I'll hold my comments for a bit.
Okay,
But a couple couple questions for staff. Number one, I've heard mixed stories about whether we would be able to go ahead and implement a solar requirement through the zoning code process. Have you been able to look into that, or could you look into that? I'm not sure. What I've heard is that if we require simply a certain square footage or percentage of rooftop space to be used for solar, that could be done through zoning and would not require reach code. I'm not sure that actually saves us time or effort. So, but I just wanted to see if you'd looked into that.
Mr. Mayor, members of City Council, we have started looking into that. So far, we have not found cities that have put that in place yet. This is similar to some of the other building code and other energy-related code items, is that, as mentioned in this presentation, the need to essentially develop a reach code to be able to pursue that. We would need to understand other facets, which are also part of that study, including finances and energy output. We're continuing to look at that, mind you, though. We are still trying to explore and see if there are other cities that have done it.
Okay, and it may not even make sense to do that, but I just wanted to check. The other thing about the timing of implementing a reach code, and Bradley, when we spoke yesterday, I thought it worked a certain way, and now I'm not so sure. So the way I thought it worked is that if we were to, let's say, do a study now, and we bring it to the CEC and we get approval, and let's say that's in January, February, because these things are never immediate, right? That we would then, and if we pass an ordinance, that we would then be required to wait till January of the following year to make it effective. But then I spoke to somebody at the Building Decarbonization Coalition who does this work all the time. They've helped over 30 cities put in reach codes. They say that's absolutely not true, that once we get approval from the CEC, we could go ahead and implement. We wouldn't have to wait till, for instance, January of 2022. So I wanted to just try to see if we could clarify that.
That is something that we can look into and see what that timeline would actually be. Cassandra, I'm not sure, do you have any additional information on that? No, it's something we'll have to look into.
Okay, because if the only reason I was thinking about the zoning code at all was if this is something that we're, ultimately going to be required to wait till 2022 to implement, then we might want to look at a zoning code change that would be faster. But if we can implement a reach code change, in the next 6 months or 9 months, then it probably doesn't make any sense to do it any other way. So that's just why I asked those two questions. And I'll hold on some comments for a little while, let my other colleagues speak.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from my colleagues? Ms. Paula Devine? Ara? Anybody? Okay, Ms. Devine. Ms. Devine.
I was concerned about the option of waiting until staff starts the lead and EcoDistrict.
So that's the
studies.
option, continue discussion with future lead Indian cities and EcoDistrict? Is that what
Right.
you're referring at?
Well, no, I'm asking a question. I wanted to wonder about the overlap, and if we direct you to do a study now, and then how long do you think it would take for the study? Would that be 6 months, as Mr. Brotman mentions?
I think that would be a reasonable expectation for timing.
Okay, and then are you expecting to start this, let's see, then when would you be starting this other study, the lead and the EcoDistricts?
We will be starting that this fall, and we anticipate coming to council sometime in early 2021 for discussion.
So would they pretty much coincide then? I mean, we wouldn't lose much time if we waited until you did everything together, or would we? How much time would we lose?
I don't think we would lose much time. I think the concern would be is if there's some redundancy or duplication in that body of work. We may already be exploring some of that as part of the lead and the eco-district discussion, and that may also help inform what we'll need to do as well.
Yeah, well, I look at this as a great opportunity to build on our clean energy program. I suggest, I brought this forward. I have another question. If we do this REACH code, will we have the ability then to mandate that the current new buildings that have this 15% area marked off to put in solar immediately?
If we were to be approved for the REACH code, correct, that is what we would be pursuing is the installation of solar panels on all commercial properties. And actually, if I could go back earlier to Mr. Brotman's Councilmember Brotman's earlier question, Jan Baer, building official, is also on the line to help answer questions, but we were informed that any REACH code that we were to adopt, or it would be effective immediately upon CEC approval. So we would not have to wait until the following January or the one after that.
Oh, that's good. That's good to know. Okay, so back to my, so it would be mandated then for these new buildings to install solar as soon as this REACH code is put into place in that 15% area.
Yes, and there wouldn't quite be necessarily the urgency to that as well, since we're not trying to hit that benchmark of January. Another reason why we would recommend following this in line with the study and the research for LEED, eco-districts, and other sustainable measures.
Okay, well, it seems like we have a lot of questions left unanswered, especially about concerning cost effectiveness on this one. So I'll hold off on my final remarks until I hear from my colleagues.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I just
Yes.
want to, if I could, just a clarification on something that Councilmember Devine said in the answer. Bradley, I maybe I misunderstood the question, but I don't think if we pass the REACH code, we could go back to buildings that are already built and entitled and require that they now put solar on that 15%, right?
No, my apologies. I may have misheard that question. No, it would not be retroactive to buildings already built. It would be going forward.
Okay.
My apologies if I misheard that.
Okay, I just wanted that to be clear.
But Mr. Mayor, may I?
Yes,
Can
please.
we mandate that though? Can we, when we develop this ordinance, draft the ordinance, can we draft that into the ordinance?
We would need to look into that. There, as you're familiar with projects such as updating the DSP code, we had set certain benchmarks for projects in the pipeline depending on where they were in the review process and who had to follow some of those rules. So that's something we can investigate and then come up with options, whether it would need to be all projects going forward or if there were projects that were in the pipeline we could consider. But that's something we would need to examine.
And if
Okay.
I could add, Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Garcia.
members of council, certainly for any project that has either completed construction or has commenced construction to substantial degree, they have a vested right to proceed under the approvals that they have. And as a result, in order to impose a new requirement on existing development, you'd have to certainly have some sort of schedule of amortization for them to recoup all their investment before imposing new requirements on them. So it's something we'll look at working with planning, but it's not something that can be just imposed on an existing project that has received its vested rights.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Katafi.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you for this report. I think it's important for us I definitely think that we do need to do something to encourage the establishment or installation of photovoltaic solar energy systems on commercial buildings. And whether we do it by pursuing option A or do it by pursuing option B, I think the ultimate goal is the same, to have more people install that in places in a state, in a region where we appreciate probably more sunshine than anywhere else. It seems to me a very common sense thing. Now, one of the things I would like to ask is, if someone was to do renovations to their roof of a structure, they're going through fixing their roof up, would this, and it's a pre-existing building, and obviously we just had discussion how we can't apply it to existing buildings, this would be for new construction, but could we possibly offer incentives in terms of fee forgiveness or reduction for when they apply, for them to be able to put their roof in such place where it could have 15% support for PV?
Yes, incentive systems are definitely something that we could look at, and I believe Carlsbad had their own incentive system as well. So that's something we could look at and see what those incentives would be to encourage that behavior. Similar to some of the things we've done with the DSP as well. That's something we could work with council to define.
Certainly, and obviously, building on that, I do have a concern about what's considered a remodel and what will be considered new construction. Obviously, if someone decides if they lose a structure in a fire and they're rebuilding it, I know we've talked about this in our code, and it's something we have to revisit, but will that be considered a new structure or not, and will they have to then comply with this goal? I would like staff to take that into consideration, because obviously that issue in a different form related to different issues has come up. But overall, I think it's important for us to be able to plan for the future, and given everything that the planet is going through with climate change and hotter summers, we've seen how the impact it has had, and if we can create even some percentage of energy independence by encouraging this and mandating it for new construction, it is a step in the positive direction. So I would support either of these approaches. My preference would be the first one, because I think even if we do the research, if the city hires a consultant and we start looking into it, that could possibly be rolled into the other actions that we take in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Najarian.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple questions. Number one, regarding the building type that we're looking at. Without getting into the details now, but if we went with option one, hiring a consultant, would that consultant be looking at the financial feasibility of the installation of PV systems?
Correct, that would be part of the scope of work.
Okay. Would that person also be looking at a conflict in building codes? If you go up to, the office building that I'm in, let's say it's 22 stories right on Brand, and I've seen the roof, and the roof is full of life safety equipment and elevators and air conditioning and generators when the power goes out. Will that consultant work on some conflict between those different building code requirements?
Yes, they would. Anything being proposed would not override anything from fire, life safety, or any other building code requirements. Those still take precedent.
And that would all be brought back. That would be part of the consultant's scope of work to clarify that for us in terms of what. I don't think they have helipads anymore. I don't think that's a requirement, but I know that there's other stuff that's certainly required for life safety. So I support the moving forward. I think perhaps having the consultant dig into this and present us with some of the issues and challenges would be a good way to go.
Thank you. All right. Is there any other comments? Yes, Mr. Broughton.
I have some comments. So, I have a question first. So, and this gets to Councilmember Kasakian's question about, a remodel or a re-roofing or something like that. Right now, isn't it true that the California Energy Commission requires that all new residential up to 3 stories has to have a certain amount of solar PV on its roof? Is that right?
That is correct for residential uses.
Okay, and that would include a re-roofing, or I don't know, would that include just a standard re-roofing, or would that be if you're doing a substantial remodel, let's say adding square footage or doing a complete tear down?
Jan, would you be able to answer that question? Are you familiar with the answer to that?
Mayor, Bear, the building official. Jan Bear, the building official.
Yes.
Hello, Mayor and City Council members. Right now, we do not mandate any kind of solar panels be installed on any existing building, period, residential or commercial. If they alter the roof, we would not make them put it on. Even to the fact that when they do ADU conversions, a new building would require them, but a remodel of a garage, they would be exempt. So right now, for existing roofs, there is nothing that would make you put them on.
Okay.
So if somebody did let's say somebody did a 50% tear down and rebuilt their house, would that constitute a new structure that would require solar?
No, it would not.
If they did a total tear down, it would not?
If they totally tear it down, do a demolition and get a permit for a new building, not an alteration, then it would trigger it.
Okay, and that's all currently in code, right?
That is in the energy code that we adopted.
Okay, so I just wanted to, just to get back to the issue that Councilmember Kasakian raised. So I think we already, for residential, I think we already have some guidelines on how that works. And I assume that, anything we do on the commercial side would, or multifamily, high-rise multifamily or anything like that would kind of have some of the same conditions.
Correct.
Okay, so I guess there were a couple things I wanted to mention, just so it's clear. And I support option one. I support getting a consultant to look at a range of possibilities and dig into some of these questions. But one thing I think might be a little unclear is when we talk about the cost effectiveness study, which is our requirement to submit to the CEC, that should not cost anything. We can get cost effectiveness studies done for free through the, and I think this is what cities do, through, what is the group called? I'm looking at my notes, the Codes and Standards Body. I'm not sure the full name, but they're not part of the CEC, but they work at the direction of the CEC. And my understanding is I can submit a letter right now and ask them for a cost effectiveness study and they will provide it. So I think when we talk about getting a consultant, we're not talking about this cost effectiveness study or that this would take 6 months or anything like that. We're talking about maybe something to help us think about what kind of models we might want to approach, we might want to use to approach this issue. Like, do we want to do something like Sebastopol, or do we want to do things like allow, let's say, an owner that has multiple buildings to do a trade-off and do more on one building than another? So I think that's important for us to understand, that this is not about cost effectiveness study. That is a very standard, simple process. And especially on solar, because so many cities have done them, there really is not a question of cost effectiveness anymore. So even on small structures. So that's one thing. The other thing is, I think if we are going to go with a consultant, and I think that I did talk to the person who did Cupertino's REACH code study. He's based in LA. He thinks, it's more like $40,000 to $60,000. I think he charged $60,000, but I don't know that we would really need to spend that much. One of the things is there is this group, and I would be happy to introduce staff to the people on the Building Decarbonization Coalition, because they will provide a lot of work for us for free. It's what they do, and so I think we can skinny that cost down quite a bit. And I would like staff to talk to Amy Ryder at the Building Decarbonization Coalition. If we're going to go out with a consultant, I would suggest that we look at a range of REACH codes, because I think it's the same process. It's very simple to do, and so I think we should look at these other things. For instance, battery storage. I don't believe that it is yet passed cost effectiveness test on a standalone basis, but I think that may be changing. So we should definitely look to see whether we can get a cost effectiveness ruling for battery storage. And I think we should look at building electrification. Many cities are now doing this. And it's important that new buildings go up with, as much as possible, be electric, because otherwise, we're going to have retrofits, because gas is on its way out. And electrification, getting cost effectiveness on electrification is now very straightforward also, especially, across the board, but really the big ones are space heating and water heating. Those are 2/3 of the carbon emissions from buildings. And if you add clothes and dishwashing, it comes to about 85%. So I would like us to include electrification. And then if we want, we can include other energy efficiency measures, including cool roofs, in that. So I would suggest we look at kind of a broader range of possible REACH codes. We could do solar first, but I think it's possibly going to be easier if we look at the broad range and try to approach it that way. So I'm on board with doing this. Those would be my suggestions. If I could just make 2 other small points. One is, and I don't know if staff had a chance to look at it, I just mentioned it yesterday, but one thing we should look at, I don't know if it's part of REACH codes or not, is a requirement for buildings to report their greenhouse gas emissions on a regular basis. I've been told, but I haven't confirmed it myself, that LA already has this in place. And I understand LA County is considering something like this. It's a good way to set up a benchmark so that we can look at reducing greenhouse gas emissions over time. Number 2, I would also like Glendale Water and Power to bring us back a report on our feed-in tariff policies and other things that create barriers to greater implementation of solar and energy efficiency. And I believe I asked for this earlier. I thought this might come with this report. It's fine that it's not, because they're not exactly the same, but I just want to make sure that that comes too, because that's very much part of this story, that we do have things that create difficulties for certain types of building uses to implement large solar systems. We also have barriers that limit the amount of energy efficiency that somebody would be paid to put in. And I think we need to think about removing some of those barriers so that we can get more of these resources built. So that's what I have to say on this.
Thank you. First, I have this question. Current building code requirement, 15% of solar-ready zone, no installation is required. I have problem with this 15%, to leave that open for future use. But as has been mentioned on page 6 of the report, which is San Francisco study, 15% is basically nothing to support, especially commercial buildings, which the roof is smaller. And if it's a high-rise building or few levels of buildings, that amounts to nothing. How somebody can explain this 15%? Is there anybody wants to answer what good it's gonna do? 15% will provide very little help.
I think there's some situations where 15% could be significant.
Warehouse, I understand. The giant one-story warehouse, it may help, but other than that, I'm looking at the buildings which we have in here, 15% will amount to nothing.
I'm not sure what the background is on where the 15% came from in the current building code.
I would say, going back to the earlier conversation, the question that Councilmember Najarian had raised, there are other things that also have to go under the rooftop as well, whether that's egress, escape, things of that nature. So the 15% is kind of evolved into the standard calculation regardless of size.
Okay, thank you. I was hoping that we're gonna go ahead with continued discussion, but apparently we have the desire to go explore and have consultant team to conduct the study. So with that, what we do now, Mr. Garcia, we go for a vote? Or do we have to vote on
Somebody needs to
this?
make a motion,
I
Mr.
will-
Mayor.
I'll be glad to move the item that we direct staff to explore hiring a consultant team to determine the feasibility of adopting a commercial PV requirement.
Is there a second?
Can I make a friendly amendment?
Yes.
I would like to add, looking at a range of reach codes to include building electrification and additional energy efficiency, including cool roofs.
Does the
Are
maker,
those going, may I ask, Mr. Mayor, are those going to be included in the LEED and the EcoDistrict study?
Mr. Who can answer the question?
We will be looking at a number of things. Right now, it's hard to say exactly what will show up as part of that study. I would say that battery storage probably will not. Cool roofs very likely could be, and so could solar.
So,
Oh, and I left off battery storage. I think we should include that. So that would be my friendly amendment, if you're willing to accept that, would be to look at this range of possible reach codes to make our buildings more energy efficient and reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
do you accept that? You're on mute.
Ms.
Do you
Ms.
accept that
Devine.
motion, that friendly
Yes,
amendment?
Yes, okay.
Needs
All
a
right,
second,
so-
Mr. Mayor.
I'll second it.
Okay, roll call, please, I guess.
Councilmember Brotman,
Yes.
Devine,
yes.
Kasakian,
Yes.
Najarian,
Yes.
and Mayor Agajanian.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Ajamian. What's next, please?
Adjournment.
Oh, may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Do I have a second? With that said, the meeting is adjourned at 2:45 PM. Thank you. And now, Ms. Devine, you can continue.
I think we have to
Thank
wait
you.
till 3, right? We need to wait
Let me know
till 3?
when we're ready.
Housing now?
Go right into it, even though